Good day. We are in Group 4 and today we will be discussing about the global demography. Hi, I am Lovely Angel Valiente and I am with LG May Sungahid, Christine De La Torre, Christine May Ginabasan, John Cedric De La Cruz, Landon Dex Libertad, and Ronnie Boy Gayungan. Before we dive into our topic, let's walk through our goals and objectives for this lesson. So, in the next hour, we will be able to discuss the relationship between population and economic welfare, to identify the effects of aging and overpopulation, and lastly, to differentiate between contrasting positions over reproductive health. So, what is demography? So, demography is a complex discipline that requires the integration of various social scientific data. It is the study of human populations, including their size, composition, and spatial distribution, as well as the process by which populations change. The big three of demography are births, deaths, and migration, which together produce population stability or change. But as we dig deeper into global demography, we're going to tackle about the worldwide population rather than the population of a specific country, region, or city. So, will a child be an economic asset or burden to the family? How we think about children and their role in the world is one of the best examples of the role of the demographic imagination of our thinking about the future. Our children are our most valuable asset as a nation. They represent our country's bright future and our hopes for a better future. However, it is dependent on the family's financial or economic situation. Of course, having a child has significant financial implications. First is the families from farm and small by the street corner enterprises usually have big and large children because the more children, the better it will be since many will work to feed their mouths. Children are an economic asset in more traditional societies like this. They are valuable in part because of their labor in such societies. A child's labor can contribute more to the family's economic situation than the child's takeaway in terms of the cost of feeding, clothing, and otherwise caring for the child. Children are also considered an informal old age pension because they are expected to care for aging parents. Hence, once again, I say that more children, the better it will be. Second is the urbanized, professional, and educated families. They desire just one or two progenies because they are committed to their respective professions and have sights of long-term saving plans. Children do not have typically bring in significant economic gains in modernized societies. Because they rarely work, instead it costs a lot to educate them and provide them with everything they are expected to have. These societies typically have government safety nets that allow parents to remain independent. Third is the rural families. Multiple children and large kinship networks are important investment for rural families. Children, for example, can abstract agricultural work. Their homes could also become retirement homes for their parent who could then care for their grandchildren. Urban families, on the other hand, may not have the same kinship network as the farm families because couples live on their own or because they move away from the farmlands. These various versions of family life shape the economic and social policies that countries devise for their respective population. And beyond these realities, we also have this reality. Countries in the less developed regions of the world that rely on agriculture tend to maintain high levels of population growth. The 1980 United Nations report on urban and rural population growth states that these areas contained 85% of the world's rural population. In 1975, are projected to contain 90% by the end of the 20th century. So how did these changes in population occur? The global agricultural population has decreased since the time people leave rural life and transfer to the urbanized community, hoping for an easier life. Compared to the figures from 1980, when the percentage of the rural and urban populations were essentially the same, It made up more than 37% of the world's population in 2011. Although families may not having more children, urban populations have risen. Instead, it is the result of a major migration of individuals to the cities in search of employment in the more contemporary sections of society. It is according to a blog site called Nourishing the Planet.
Of the urban population. Migration. One of the reasons why urban population raised. International migration. Approximately 191 million people live in countries other than their own. They even projected that 2.2 million will move from the developing world to the first world countries.
Perils of overpopulation. Long before too much population growth was recognized as a problem, there are already people who share their insights about the negative effects of overpopulation. One of them was Thomas Malthus, who was a famous economist. He shared his thoughts centuries before today by writing a book in 1798 titled An Essay on the Principle of Population. One of the highlights that was written in that book was that population growth will inevitably exhaust world food supply. What Thomas Malthus meant by this is too much population will overwhelm the food that the world can produce. He used the word inevitable to describe the negative effects of overpopulation because food is an essential basic necessity for each individual. So Thomas Malthus reminded the world that too much population means too many mouths to feed. Paul Ehrlich and Anne Ehrlich wrote a book titled The Population Bomb in 1960s. The book predicted worldwide famine in the 1970s and 1980s due to overpopulation as well as other major societal upheavals and advocated immediate action to limit population growth. Fears of the population explosion existed in the 1950s and 1960s, but the book and its author brought the idea to an even wider audience. The book also argued that overpopulation in the 1970s and 1980s will bring about global environmental disasters that would lead to food shortage and mass starvation. This book, The Population Bomb, raised awareness in the 1960s about overpopulation and its negative effects, and it also advocated for nations across the globe to do something to slow down the growth of world population to prevent its disastrous outcomes.
Recommendations of US in Global Population Control. From the book, The Population Bomb, they propose that countries like the United States should take the lead in the promotion of global population control in order to reduce the growth rate to zero. First recommendation is the bizarre, or the chemical castration on salpingectomy. Chemical castration is a popular term for what doctors call anti-libidinal treatment or medical castrations. It means reducing male testosterone by administering a drug similar to the female hormone progesterone through injection or pills. While many people know about this process as a way to stop sex offenders, medical castration is used also as a treatment for tumors that feed on the sex hormones. Then is the salpingectomy. Salpingectomy is the surgical removal of one or both fallopian tubes. It's performed to treat certain conditions of the fallopian tubes and ectopic pregnancies, and as a preventive measure for women at higher risk of developing ovarian cancer. Case in point, chemical castration is set as a corporal punishment for sex offenders in Pakistan, South Korea, United States, the Czech Republic, Ukraine, and Nigeria. The purpose of castration and salpingectomy is to reduce the population and the mortality.
Second, policy-oriented, taxing additional child and luxury taxes on child-related products. Case in point, China. The Chinese law mandates that families should only have a child or two based on the recent reform. Children born third or later shall be taxed. In addition, the new policy allowing Chinese couples to have two children was proposed to help address the aging issue in China. Third, monetary incentives, paying of men who would agree to be sterilized to undergo vasectomy after having two children. However, A vasectomy is a surgical procedure to cut or seal the tubes that carry a man's sperm to permanently prevent pregnancy. The country of China and India, they undertake sterilization in order to preserve or restrain population growth. Fourth, institution building. Create a powerful department for population environment mitigation. In 1920 onwards, Indian government marked lower castes, working poor, and Muslims as hypersexual and hyperfecund and hence a drain on national resources. Between 1965 and 1970, annual growth rate of 2.6%. 1955 to 1975, growth rate rose from 1.8% per year after the devastation brought by World War II. 1958, American Policy Journal of Foreign Affairs has already advocated contraception and sterilization as the practical solutions to global economic, social, and political problems. 1955 to 1975, growth rate rise from 1.8% per year after the devastations brought by World War II. May 2009, group of American billionaires warned of how a nightmarish explosion of people was a potentially disastrous environmental, social, and industrial threat to the world. The mid-20th century, the Philippines, China, and India sought to lower birth rates on the belief that unless controlled, the free expansion of family members would lead to a crisis in resources. Population control. By limiting the population, vital resources could be used for economic progress and do not be diverted and wasted to feeding more mouths. Population control contend for universal access to reproductive technologies such as condoms, pills, abortion, and vasectomy. In Puerto Rico, reproductive health supporters regard their work as a task of transforming their poor country into a modern nation. Population experts blame the irresponsible fecundity of Egyptians for the nation's run on population growth, and the Iranian peasants' natural libidinal tendencies for the same rise in population. Birth control programs. These policy formulations lead to extreme policies like the forced sterilization of 20 million violators of the Chinese government's one-child policy. Vietnam and Mexico also conducted coercive mass sterilization.
I am John Cedric H. De La Cruz, and this is It's the Economy, Not the Babies. Critics of Population Control by Betsy Hartman. Disagrees with by advocates of neo-Malthusian's theory and accused governments of using population control as a substitute for social justice and much-needed reforms such as land distribution, employment creation, provision of mass education and health care, and emancipation. Positive effect of population growth. Number 1. Economic development. Many pointed out that growth in the population of many countries in the 1960s aided economic development by spurring technological and institutional innovation and increasing the supply of human ingredients. They acknowledge a shift in population from rural to urban areas. 52 to 75 in the developing world since the 1950s. They likewise noted that while these megacities are now clustered in which income disparities, along with transportation, housing, air population, and waste management, are major problems. They also have become and continue to be centers of economic growth and activity. Number 2. The workforce. 29.4 females and 39.9 males, median age young working population. There are some assumptions that having a baby boom can mean that there will be be more workers per dependents and production will increase relative to consumption. GDP then will receive a boost. The productive capacities of this generation are high in regions like East Asia. Green Revolution. Create high-yielding varieties of rice and other cereals. In 1950 to 1984, global grain production increased by over 250%. If government push their birth control programs, they must also include inclusive growth and greener economic growth.
Population growth and food security. Today's global population has reached 7.9 billion and it is estimated to increase to 9.5 billion in 2050, then 11.2 billion by the next 2,100 years. The median age of this population is 30.1, with the male median age at 29.4 years and female 30.9 years. 90% of this population growth will happen in the developing countries, with the demographers predicting that by the middle of this century, several countries will have tripled their population. The opposite is happening in the developed world, where population remains steady in general, but declining in some of the most advanced countries like Japan and Singapore. Demographers predicting that the world population will stabilize by 2050 to 9 billion, although they warn that feeding this population will be an immense challenge. The Food and Agricultural Organization, or FAO, warns that in order for countries to mitigate the impact of population growth, food production must increase by 70%. Annual cereal production must rise to 3 billion tons from the current 2.1 billion, and yearly meat production must go up to 200 million tons to reach 470 million. The FAO also recommends that countries should increase their investment in agriculture, craft long-term policies aimed at fighting poverty, and invest in research and development. So, that explains our lecture for the last topic in the contemporary world, the global demography.